Thanks for joining us, everybody. After Mueller, Democrats say they're already in an impeachment investigation. A Democrat now calling for impeachment joining us. Also, Mitch McConnell under fire for blocking election security bills as Russia meddles in elections right now. And I'm going to be joined live by two senators who went inside a migrant detention center in El Paso today. But we're going to start with an escalation in the obstruction investigation into President Trump. House Judiciary Chairman Nadler saying, quote, an impeachment investigation is underway. Nadler citing impeachment as his legal argument in a petition filed today to get secret Mueller grand jury material. Watch this.
Today, we are filing an application for the grand jury material underlying the Mueller report. That information is critically important for our ability to examine witnesses, including former White House counsel Don McGahn, and to investigate the president's misconduct.
So Nadler acknowledged asking the court for secret grand jury material means they are looking at impeachment.
The committee is exercising its authority to investigate all these scandals and to decide what to do about them, which could include articles of impeachment. And we've filed that with the court. We are doing this not just as part of normal oversight, but also because as part of our Article 1 authority and responsibility to consider all remedies, including possibility of articles of impeachment. We're considering what remedies we can do, including the possibility of articles of impeachment.
All right. So when asked if he believes they're already in an impeachment investigation, Nadler saying, in effect, here is the petition. The words impeach or impeachment mentioned 85 separate times, with the argument citing this, a constitutional power of the utmost gravity, approval of articles of impeachment. Right now, 96 Democrats are calling for an impeachment inquiry. 7 have come out in support after Mueller's testimony, including the highest-ranking Democrat so far, Congresswoman Katherine Clark, the 6th-ranking House Democrat, based her decision on, quote, unprecedented stonewalling and obstruction. Let's get into it. Jill Wine-Banks is a former assistant Watergate special prosecutor. Sam Seder, host of the Majority Report radio show, and NYU professor Christina Beltran. Jill, I got to start with you. I mean, to do or not to do, what does this escalation mean to you?
It means that Mueller really set the stage for this. He established some really key points that may not have been delivered in a dramatic fashion, but the facts are there, that there was no exoneration, that he found at least 5 instances of obstruction where all 3 elements of the crime were committed, and there was actual evidence to prove those, that he needs to proceed on those. There's also impeachable offenses that aren't necessarily crimes. You mentioned stonewalling, for example. Stonewalling interferes with Congress's oversight powers. Congress has the power of impeachment and the power of oversight. And President Trump is interfering with both the investigation of criminal acts, just like Richard Nixon, obstruction of justice, cover-up, that's what it is. But in addition, he has taken a blanket approval of nobody cooperating. He has said, no one will cooperate. I won't give you any documents. I won't. And it's not just on the criminal investigation. It's on whether or not he's separating families. This is a terrible invasion of the powers of Congress. And our whole constitutional framework requires that we have that.
So the big question is, where are Democrats heading, Sam, right? What are the next steps? What does this mean? Are they heading towards an official impeachment inquiry, then leading to possible impeachment? What is their plan? Or do they even have a plan, right? How significant is it that we heard Jerry Nadler saying, in effect, and I'm quoting that, in effect, this is an impeachment inquiry?
I mean, look, I don't have any inside information in terms of the dynamic between Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler, but he clearly is moving forward. And she clearly has, over the past several months, indicated that she doesn't want to move forward, or she wants to move at an incredibly slow pace. And I think, look, the facts are overtaking her desire. It's become increasingly obvious that there's multiple grounds for impeachment. But once you even get past the civics and the duty of Congress, from a political standpoint, it makes total sense.
It does.
Of course it does. Because the idea, look, they have already passed 60 bills that are message bills. Some of them are great, some of them are okay. They have not resonated with the American public. The bottom line is there is nothing left for them to do. They need to maintain their oversight, just from a strictly political standpoint. I mean, I think you need the civics part to justify this. But from a political standpoint, something needs to fill the vacuum that exists between now and the election. And we saw some indication of what the Republicans are willing to do. Donald Trump today was talking about investigating President Obama. If the Democrats don't fill that vacuum, the Republicans will. And from a political standpoint, they need to go and fill that vacuum.
But Christina, there's a question of timing here, right? As we well know, they're headed on vacation. They're going to be off basically for the entire month of August. I mean, if you think about the timing of all of this, I mean, we couldn't be looking at the launch of an impeachment inquiry even until late fall. Right? And then we'd be well into the primaries by January. And then you have the election in November 2020. So there is a political calculus happening here for the Democrats.
Yeah, no, they have to deal with the timing of this. But I don't think it's really a problem. I mean, I think that I agree with what Sam was saying. I mean, I think that politically, this is just a critical moment for a couple of reasons. I mean, one thing that's really key here is that while they're on break, I think. Well, I'll back up. I think one thing that's been happening is there's sort of been this dream that Mueller was going to be the patriarch who kind of created the conditions for us to say, okay, now we're ready to impeach.
That didn't happen.
And the fact of the matter is, no one is coming to save us, right? The only people that are going to save this democracy are the citizens and elected representatives who are holding themselves accountable and who care about the Constitution and want to do this. So two things I think are going to be important is during the break is what are citizens going to be doing in terms of showing up at town hall meetings and saying, we demand this,
and that's huge.
And that's going to be
huge because that's how they spend their time in August, is having these town hall meetings. So are they going to be asking their constituents the question of should we pursue an impeachment inquiry?
And the leadership role they could play is to really say, look, this isn't about we're not going to get him out of office through impeachment. What we're going to do is there's going to be something really key about basically putting a stamp on Donald Trump that says this is criminal and corrupt. This is somebody who's not protecting the Constitution. The whole question of Russian interference in the election, there should be a mass march in the fall just demanding that these bills around Russian interference happen, because it's our democracy at stake, and the cavalry's not coming. It's citizens having to take care of this with their representatives, and that's the case that both citizens have to make and representatives have to hear.
Jill, there's two things right now that Nadler is after: the grand jury material, as we well know, and also Don McGahn, subpoenaing John McGahn and enforcing that subpoena. Let's talk first about the grand jury material. What are they expecting to see with this grand jury material?
They're expecting to see really revealing, compelling evidence. And based on what I know from the Watergate case and the grand jury information that we turned over under the same rule, we applied to the court for 60 exceptions and gave it to the House Judiciary Committee. I know that that was what led to their impeachment. They used that material, and I believe there's very compelling evidence in the 6E material. The best thing is getting Don McGahn, because that's like John Dean standing there raising his hand and saying, I'm here to tell the truth. And it's much better to hear a live fact witness than to hear the supervisor of people who talk to the fact witness say.
But to play devil's advocate here, they wanted Mueller, they got Mueller, and a lot of people are saying he didn't necessarily deliver the decision that they were looking for and that they were going to launch an impeachment inquiry. How are they so sure that Don McGahn will do that?
They accepted Mueller because they were denied everybody else. The president and Barr have interfered with their investigation, their oversight, their impeachment powers by blanket refusal to let any witness testify. The only one they would let testify, honestly, even if we had had Archie Cox or Leon Jaworski testifying, they wouldn't have known all the facts any more than we would expect Mueller to. I interviewed the witnesses, not Archie Cox. We need the people who were on the trial team, or in this case, in the investigation, to deliver the message. And I also want to add just to what Sam said. I think that we know for sure that Nancy Pelosi supported the action that was taken today. That has to mean that she has moved somewhat from opposing any action to allowing the initiation of steps. And there's a lot of reason that I think that people back home during the August recess are going to say, you have to do this. And here's the danger of not doing it is I get on Twitter all the time, people saying, what's the point of being a Democrat? They're not following this at all. So why does it matter?
I'll add, too, that I don't know that it's a coincidence, and but who knows. But Jerrold Nadler is now facing a primary challenger who is running on the idea of impeachment. Other members of the Democratic leadership
and members of Senate as well, who are also now coming out for impeachment.
Well, they are looking at primary challenges.
So you think this is a political calculus for Nadler?
Well, I think everything is a political calculus. I mean, frankly, they're
but
politicians.
A personal one.
Well, listen, I think it's, frankly, I'm not convinced that it's not a personal calculation for Nancy Pelosi. You know, there is the iron law of power in institutions is that people would rather maintain power within an institution than necessarily increase the power of the institution itself. I mean, it is unclear to me why Nancy Pelosi would put the brakes on this. So I think all politicians act in what is their best interest, and incentives come from all different directions.
Yeah, I mean, incentives clearly come from like a public that is organizing and mobilizing around this. And you can't, at some point, they need to craft a narrative. And if they're not going to craft it, then progressive organizations need to craft that narrative that they can respond to, because they can't just wait for perfect witnesses to come and reveal the political strategy. That has to be forged by actual movements and communities
and I just want to get this in,
elected officials.
Some that I've spoken to have said it is time for them to make a decision because we are heading towards an election. And possibly the only way to impeach this president, if that's in fact what you are angling for, is to vote him out of office come November 2020.
There's a lot that can happen during the recess. Okay, there's a lot that
got a lot of reactions on my panel, so Jill, you first.
A lot that can happen.
Yeah.
The lawsuits are going to proceed, and by the time Congress comes back, and it's important that they take the recess to hear from their constituents, I can tell you that in Watergate, after the Saturday Night Massacre, when everybody got fired, Archie Cox and the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General all got fired, it was the public reaction that 3 days after they got fired, Richard Nixon said, "Okay."
But what did you say about Nixon? What did you?
He's a crook. I mean,
no, he respected the rule of law. But I will say this: look, I don't think that there's anyone in the country who thinks that impeachment is going to lead to Donald Trump leaving office. The point is, you need to put down a marker as to who is accountable and what the president can get away with. And if the Republican Party wants to stand in front of, in between providing justice and accountability for Donald Trump, let them run on that. Yeah. And I think that's the point that people are pushing for.
And I mean, I think you can gather all this up around Russian interference. I mean, fundamentally, our democracy is so threatened right now that this should be a five-alarm fire. And I do think that they're ultimately going to have to, put this out as an organized event for movements to actually have to articulate.
There's a five-alarm.
The power of narrative is something Democrats have consistently failed on. This is their moment. They have to craft one.
There's a five-alarm fire in the control room right now because they're telling me to wrap. Jill Wine-Bands, thanks. Sam Seder, Christina Beltran, thank you guys all. Very much appreciate it. Have a fantastic weekend.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.